LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the February 16th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing here tonight. This week I have 12 of the best, most newsworthy clips that I've picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. I have a link down in the video description to my clip list of my 12 clips. Actually, the first one comes from HBO. I guess that's still part of the corporate media. And then the other 11 come from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. I have a Real Time with Bill Maher clip as with the political comedy I will start off with, which is one of my clips on my top topic, Trump versus justice. I will be committing some legal analysis using some of my background as a criminal defense attorney to talk about the corruption of the Justice Department that became more evident this week with Trump tweeting about the sentencing of Roger Stone and Bill Barr doing this brief interview with ABC, which strangely didn't get a lot of play on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, but I will have two representatives of the White House answering questions about that. Kellyanne Conway was on Fox News Sunday, and then Marc, who's chief of staff for the vice president, was on CNN State of the Union talking to Dana Bash, and I'll have long clips from both of them, and I will be commenting on what you'll see Bill Maher talks about as the one of the last gasps of our nation of laws, and then I'll have a bunch of clips on the continuing 2020 Democratic candidate contest, where it seems to be narrowing down to, Bernie is one of the front runners, maybe Buttigieg is, at least in terms of delegates, but the moderate lane is cluttered, they say, with Buttigieg and Klobuchar and a little bit of Biden left over, and then Bloomberg coming in and Steyer, and anyway, I will talk about all that with the second half of the clips, the secondary topic. But first, like I said, Bill Maher in his opening monologue, like I said, talking about the last gasp of our nation of laws, Roger Stone, Bill Barr, though at one point you'll notice he refers to Bill Barr as Bill Maher, even though he is Bill Maher, which is one of the things I want to point out about this clip that I pointed out already, but we'll point out a couple more things after we watch it together over here.
Well, the latest and the last gasp of a nation of dying laws was this week when Roger Stone, you remember Roger Stone, guy who looks like the doorman at an orgy. He's Trump's original political advisor. Do you know that? They go way back. He has known Roger over 3 wives. And Roger, was the conduit between Russia and WikiLeaks, and he was convicted of 7 felonies in a fair court done by pros, and he was going to get 7 to 9 in prison, and then Trump tweets, unfair. And, of course, the Justice Department, led by Bill Maher, intervenes, and then Trump and Barr play their ventriloquist game where the dummy pretends he's mad. Barr was like, I'm drawing a line in the swamp. Really, he said this yesterday. He said, Donald Trump's tweeting is making it impossible for me to do my job. Yes, because you're supposed to be a cop and he's a crook. Trump's the guy who asked you to bury a dead body with him and then puts it on YouTube.
I don't know, I think that would violate YouTube's terms of service. At least they probably wouldn't let him monetize it if he did that, but that's just my experience with YouTube. Maybe you've had a different experience, and I liked how Bill Maher raised the question about whether Bill Barr being so upset that Trump was tweeting, was it all an act? That's why in my title of my video I have Trump versus Justice ? Because there is some question as to whether it was all an act, though, I talked about how ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos didn't really till about like 40 minutes into the program, didn't even cover this whole controversy, even though Bill Barr gave his interview to Pierre Thomas. And you'll see some of that in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary I'm going to show next. And the thing about that is that Pierre Thomas, in a clip I'm not going to show, they had like their pundit and reporter discussion. He said one of the reasons that Bill Barr came out at the Justice Department, or came out and did that interview, is because his position in the Justice Department was becoming untenable. It wasn't just the 4 prosecutors in the Roger Stone case who resigned from the case and one resigned from the Justice Department. There are like 5,000 prosecutors all over the country, and there was talk of like thousands of prosecutors doing a walkout, and he was like losing control of the Department of Justice because they were so outraged the way the president was politicizing it. And I think that was the top story this week, and it was covered somewhat on the news programs, but also they covered the Democratic race, where, there isn't that much news right at the moment. There are some big news events coming up on Wednesday. There's going to be the Democratic candidate debate out of Nevada, and probably the first time that Michael Bloomberg's going to show up on a debate stage. And then next Saturday, right before my Sunday Live Clip Roundup next Sunday, there'll be the Nevada caucus, and then the following Saturday is South Carolina. And then Tuesday, March 3rd, that's Super Tuesday. That's when I get to vote. And I will tell you, I think I'm leaning more towards Bernie Sanders for reasons I'll talk about when I get to that topic. But I'm going to show you 4 news summaries, 2 of which kind of mix the Trump Justice Department scandal and the Democratic candidate contest. The ABC News one is all Democratic candidate contest and mostly focused on South Carolina and Biden. I'm not even going to show you the whole thing for reasons I'll discuss when I get to it. And then Fox News actually completely concentrated on, or almost completely concentrated on what was going on with the Justice Department, but left out some key details I'll talk about when I get to that 4th news summary. But let me start with NBC News' Meet the Press news summary. Chuck Todd giving the introduction. This is where he comes up with this "no country for old men" quote about the Democratic candidates being a mess, and it does definitely emphasize the Democratic presidential contest over the Trump versus Justice topic that I think is much more important in terms of the survival of our republic, for reasons I'll discuss a little later. But first, let's watch this 4-minute, 19-second news summary from NBC News' Meet the Press, and I will discuss some of the good and bad parts of it after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. When you're thinking about the Democratic presidential race, it's helpful to remember a line from the movie No Country for Old Men. No, I'm not going where you think I'm going. Paraphrasing here. If this ain't a mess, it'll do till the mess gets here. Bernie Sanders has a plausible path to the nomination, leaving the Democratic establishment grasping for an alternative. 2 alternatives, Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, are splitting the center-left vote for now, while another, Mike Bloomberg, stands ready to divide the non-Sanders wing even more come March. And then there's Joe Biden, the one-time presumed frontrunner. 4th and 5th place finishes in Iowa and New Hampshire have raised serious doubts about whether his campaign can survive. In just a moment, you'll see my exclusive sit-down with the former vice president. And against that backdrop has come what one Democratic senator called President Trump's retribution tour. Mr. Trump sacking or attacking perceived enemies, including those who testified at the House impeachment hearings, and then, of course, trying to protect his friends. It all suggests that the lesson Mr. Trump learned from impeachment is to just be himself, only more so. It's left Democrats feeling an even greater urgency to find the right candidate to take on Mr. Trump, while being no closer to figuring out who that candidate is.
Nevada,
South Carolina,
California,
North Carolina,
Virginia,
right here in Texas.
As Democratic candidates look to Nevada, South Carolina, and the 15 states and territories that vote on Super Tuesday, Democrats are already anxious about the potential of a drawn-out primary fight that could drag on for months.
I did win the popular vote in Iowa. I did win the popular vote and win the primary in New Hampshire. I think we're going to win in Nevada.
The strong start by Bernie Sanders is triggering alarm among some Democrats who worry he could win a plurality of delegates with strength just on the left without broadening his political support.
I was the only one on that stage that raised my hand and said that I didn't think we should have a socialist leading the Democratic ticket.
What he's offering is a vision that says you've got to either be for the revolution or you're for the status quo, and there's nothing in between.
And Democrats worry if Sanders is not the nominee, many of his supporters may refuse to get in line behind another candidate. This week, Sanders supporters attacked Nevada's hotel workers union after it criticized his position on Medicare for all.
We're living in a strange world on the internet, and sometimes people attack people in somebody else's name. But let me be very clear. Anybody making personal attacks against anybody else in my name is not part of our movement. We don't want them.
With Joe Biden's decline, Democrats are jockeying to prove they are the best equipped to take on Sanders and win the center. Among them, Michael Bloomberg, whose rise in the polls is fueled by more than $300 million in ad spending.
You've all heard the slogan, Mike will get it done, and if you haven't, I've been spending an awful lot of money to get it out of.
With Bloomberg's growing strength comes new scrutiny of his past, including a 2015 speech defending New York City's controversial stop-and-frisk policing policy.
The way you get the guns out of kids' hands is to throw them against the wall and frisk them.
Sometimes you just make a mistake, and I think the sign of leadership is standing up and saying so.
2008 comments that seemed to blame the economic crisis on banks ending redlining, the denial of housing loans to minority neighborhoods.
That crisis would not have been averted if the banks had been able to be bigger racists. And anyone who thinks that should not be the leader of our party.
And allegations from women of sexist comments and workplace discrimination at his company. On Saturday, Bloomberg tweeted, "I would not be where I am today without the talented women around me. I will always be a champion for women in the workplace." Bloomberg's rise and the muddle among centrist Democrats is a product of one thing: Biden's struggles.
Nobody told me it'd be easy. I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me now. Don't leave us now.
Yesterday, I sat down with the former Vice President Joe Biden in Las Vegas, where he is campaigning ahead of Saturday's Nevada caucuses. I began by asking...
And I will have a Joe Biden clip, if you're following along, clip number 12. That's actually the last clip. Will be the Joe Biden clip, where I have a couple clips of other Democratic candidates responding to this controversy that I showed when I had the thumbnail as Larry David as Bernie Sanders, and from the that was that last week or the week before? I can't even remember at this point. But where Bernie Sanders, in the parody on Saturday Night Live, at the beginning of Saturday Night Live, they had Larry David claiming that he was popular on the internet with all the trolls, and 4chan, although I don't think 4chan is really where the Bernie bros hang out, to the extent there are Bernie bros, but that story has really gotten played up. You saw some of it in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary we just watched, where they talked about the conflict between the so-called Bernie bros and the Culinary Union in Nevada. And I will have Joe Biden talking about that, and Pete Buttigieg talking about that in my final two clips. But I want to show you three more news summaries. This is the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary comes next. And this is like one of the types of media bias that people don't really talk about a lot. I talk about it a lot, though, which is if they have like an exclusive interview or they're on location, they have this bias for the person they have the exclusive interview with, or their special location. And Martha Raddatz is like on the road in South Carolina for this week, I guess, which may explain why they're not talking at all about the corruption of the Department of Justice by the Trump administration. That, like I said, even though Pierre Thomas of ABC News got the scoop, the big interview with Bill Barr, the Attorney General, that doesn't get mentioned till like 40 minutes into this program. I'm not even going to show you this whole news summary because they it turns into like an extended interview of James Clyburn, the one of the powerful Democrats from South Carolina. And it, like I said, it focuses way too heavily on South Carolina. And, you know, last week, ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos had the exclusive interview, first big Sunday morning news interview with Joe Biden. And I almost think that maybe in exchange for that interview, they agreed to spend all this time talking to the Biden campaign in South Carolina, because they spend an inordinate amount of time talking to those people, but they get like really good access, and it especially shows the leadership of black women in the Biden campaign in South Carolina. And anyway, I'll talk about all that a little more after we watch this just under 2-minute news summary. Like I said, I kind of cut it off at the end for reasons I will explain after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week on this President's Day weekend. With the first two major contests in the 2020 race behind us, all eyes are now on Nevada and South Carolina. With no clear Democratic frontrunner, the next two contests could prove decisive in the sprint to Super Tuesday, the day when the largest share of states and territories weigh in. This week, we hit the ground in South Carolina, that primary just 2 weeks away, and the former longtime frontrunner Joe Biden staking his campaign on the prospect of minority voters delivering him a victory that could change the narrative after Iowa and New Hampshire. It's the first in the South primary, where black voters, for the first time in this election cycle, will be the overwhelming majority, expected to cast up to 2/3 of all ballots in the February 29th primary. For Joe Biden, it could be do or die. After serving as Barack Obama's vice president, Biden's strong connection to minority voters has made this state key to his nomination strategy. He still leads in the polls and has the lion's share of endorsements here, but after lackluster finishes in Iowa and New Hampshire, his supporters are doing everything they can to make sure he has a strong finish.
We ask you, God, to please put your arms around Vice President Biden and all the other candidates, Lord, all of them.
What this group of 100 black females is about is activism. The self-proclaimed Reckoning Crew, whose oldest member is 94, is giving heart and soul to the Biden campaign.
If you want to read through it first, you can, so you have be confident when you're talking to them.
As their name suggests, they're not to be trifled with.
Well, I'm calling to see if you are planning to support Joe Biden in the 2020 South Carolina primary. Well, thank you very much. All righty, thank you. Bye-bye.
So that sounded like a successful one for you.
Yes, it was.
He or she just immediately said.
Yes, she did.
Okay. Right now, they're a solid wall of support for the former vice president, but if that's not in the cards... Now, what about somebody like Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Michael Bloomberg?
All of them be better than what we have. But Vice President Joe Biden is the man of the hour. I think he has the guts and also the experience.
In the chamber of the South Carolina State House, State Rep Todd Rutherford, who's been in office since 1998, worries Biden's experience isn't enough to beat Donald Trump. So he's leaning towards Michael Bloomberg.
This is not about Democrats falling in love. This is about Democrats making sure that Donald Trump can no longer be the president. And people are so focused on that. And we are not interested in somebody that cannot win.
He keeps saying, I can win South Carolina. I am electable. You just don't buy that?
It begins to sound like an excuse. He appears to be a step behind. He's not saying the things that we need to hear as South Carolinians to believe that he's able to take on Donald Trump.
Do you really think that Democrats can beat him?
Oh, yeah, we can. Will we? I'm not sure.
If anyone can be considered a kingmaker in South Carolina, it's Congressman and Majority Whip James Clyburn. He's represented the state for more than 2 decades. Each presidential election cycle, Clyburn has a can't-miss fish fry for national candidates to introduce themselves to South Carolinians. He has yet to endorse any of the candidates this year. So tell me what is more important. Is it issues that affect African Americans, or is it, I don't care who it is, as long as they beat Donald Trump?
There's a combination of both. Sure, we want to defeat Donald Trump, but defeating Donald Trump and losing legislative seats, losing redistricting, which will be taking place 2 years from now, what have we gotten? I think that for us to maintain our down ballot strength, that has to come into the equation. Sure, Donald Trump is anathema to black people. He ought to be to every American.
Donald Trump said it's been great for African Americans and employment. He certainly has.
So, like I said, I kind of stopped that early because I played that for 30 seconds longer than the NBC News Meet the Press news summary. And there was so much more in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary. Well, first of all, Meet the Press actually covered the main topic that I think is important this week, Trump versus his Justice Department. Like I said before, I showed the clip. ABC never mentioned it in their entire news summary, even though they're the ones who had that breaking interview with Bill Barr. And there was also a lot more. I think you got a lot more information about the state of the Democratic race listening to what Meet the Press told you than that. Hyper focus on South Carolina and also on the Biden campaign that I don't quite understand there from ABC. It does go on. There's a little bit about the effect of Bloomberg that I cut out, and more of an interview with James Clyburn. So there's a little more information about the race, but like I said, I couldn't quite understand the choices that ABC made this week in their news summary. Now I have two more shorter news summaries than those last two. This is the shortest one from CNN's State of the Union. Dana Bash was in for Jake Tapper this week, where the State of our Union this week, that's what Jake Tapper always does, and Dana Bash also does it when she's guest hosting, is off to the races, but because of course there was the Daytona 500 that Trump took advantage of and turned into like a campaign event and used a whole bunch of like taxpayer money to make himself look good to the Daytona 500 voters, who I guess are more of his base than a lot of sports, but that's actually not really covered in this State of the Union news summary, but they do a better job of covering both the problem with the Justice Department, which is the first story covered, unlike the last two news summaries that led with the Democratic race. And then there is a little coverage of the Democratic race, which I will talk about with you after we watch this much shorter, just over a minute news summary from CNN's State of the Union this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in for Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is off to the races. President Trump wakes up today in Florida, where he will serve as the Grand Marshal at the Daytona International Speedway. But he leaves behind outrage here in Washington as he continues to sound off on cases in front of his own Justice Department, even after the uproar prompted Attorney General Bill Barr to publicly urge the president to back off. But Barr's own decision to oversee or overrule career officials in some criminal cases involving people with ties to the president is raising more questions about the line between President Trump and the Justice Department. Meanwhile, the Democratic race to challenge President Trump has moved to Nevada, where Democrats are looking to prove they can build a diverse coalition of support in a primary race many now expect to stretch on for months. This morning, I'll speak with two candidates, former Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Amy Klobuchar, who are trying to capitalize on momentum coming out of New Hampshire. Joining me now from Las Vegas is the candidate with...
And I actually will have a Pete Buttigieg clip, like I mentioned earlier. That's clip number 11 if you're following along on my clip list down at a link in the video description. But I want to get to, and like I said, that was a good balance, and it was short, but at least it covered both topics in the order I think of importance. And over on Fox News Sunday, they really focused on what happened in the Department of Justice and the conflict between Trump and Bill Barr. So I at least, I guess, have to give the, Trump TV station kudos for doing that. But there are some problems in this coverage. First of all, you'll see it's Chris Wallace doing an introduction and then sending it over to their reporter Marc Meredith, who I don't recall seeing before, certainly not on Fox News Sunday. And there is definitely some bias in the report. Marc Meredith does an intro and then goes to a pre-recorded package. One of the things that's totally missing, I watched this a couple times. Usually I watch the clips 3 times. Once when I watch the show, once when I'm capturing the clip, and then once when I watch it with all of you during the live stream. So this is like my 3rd time, and the other 2 times I watched pretty carefully. They never mentioned that in the Roger Stone case that the 4 attorneys who were the career prosecutors on the case who withdrew from the case. One resigned from the Department of Justice. That never comes up in this whole news summary, even though you'll see they spend like 2.5 minutes on the whole thing. They also talk about, one of my favorite phrases from this is raising eyebrows. But also Chris Wallace in the introduction really buys into this whole thing. He starts off saying how, critics have said Bill Barr is not the Attorney General of the United States, but acting more like Trump's personal attorney. But this week he really showed how there's a big conflict between them. And I think that really plays into what I was talking about at the beginning when Bill Maher in his monologue was saying how it's all a show and they're just pretending to be in conflict, and it's the only real conflict is that Trump is making it too obvious that Bill Barr is covering for Trump's crimes or prosecuting his enemies. But anyway, I will talk about all of that a little more after we watch the final news summary, the most biased news summary, of course, Fox News news summary. But at least it focused on the right topic, which I will talk about with you after we watch together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. Ever since William Barr became Attorney General, critics have complained he acts more like the president's personal lawyer than the nation's top law enforcement officer. But this week, Barr said Mr. Trump's comments and tweets about criminal cases make it impossible for him to do his job. Meanwhile, prosecutors dropped a tough sentencing recommendation for longtime Trump advisor Roger Stone, but decided not to pursue criminal charges against a favorite Trump target, former FBI official Andrew McCabe. In a moment, we'll speak with counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway. But first, let's bring in Marc Meredith, reporting from the president's retreat at Mar-a-Lago with the latest. Marc.
Chris, the White House says the president still has confidence and faith in his attorney general, even as multiple congressional Democrats are calling for Bill Barr to resign amid multiple controversies facing his department.
I'm not going to be bullied or influenced by anybody.
Attorney General Bill Barr is raising eyebrows for selecting an outside prosecutor to review the case against former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. In 2017, Flynn pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI, recently asked to withdraw that plea, and is still awaiting sentencing. Meantime, the Justice Department says it's no longer pursuing a case against former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe.
It is an absolute disgrace that they took 2 years before they finally drew the obvious conclusion.
President Trump repeatedly criticized McCabe over his role in the Russia probe and tweeted Saturday that McCabe, quote, authorized media leaks to advance personal interests. Last week, the president praised the Justice Department for changing the way it's handling the case against former Trump associate Roger Stone. Stone was convicted in November on multiple counts of lying to Congress. Prosecutors planned to ask for a 7 to 9 year sentence, but senior justice officials overruled their recommendation and plan to push for a shorter sentence.
I have not discussed the Roger Stone case at the White House.
Democrats don't buy it and are calling for Barr to step down.
Everything that Bill Barr is about right now is just about loyalty to Donald Trump, and we just can't have that. He should not be the Attorney General.
Barr will be forced to explain some of his decisions. He's expected to head up to the House Judiciary Committee for a hearing at the end of March. Chris?
Marc Meredith reporting from Mar-a-Lago. Marc, thank you. And joining us now.
And joining him now is Kellyanne Conway, and that's going to be my next clip. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but I think I pretty much criticized that Fox News bias before I showed it. Although I did notice I got a super chat contribution, which I always appreciate during the live shows, especially because my videos most often get demonetized during all the time that they have views for reasons I can't quite understand. But I appreciate this super chat contribution here from Lulu Girl. Asking me to wear a peach shirt next week. I noticed before I come on the live stream broadcast, people are like betting or guessing as to what my shirt's going to be. I saw one person guessed a black shirt and one person guessed a Hawaiian shirt, although I want to point out, sort of in honor of Nevada, which where in like Reno and Las Vegas you can see some palm trees, and of course in South Carolina you can see some palm trees. This black shirt, if you look really closely, it's got palm trees on it, so it's kind of like a black Hawaiian shirt. So it's both black and Hawaiian, so it's intersectional in that way, I guess. But anyway, I wanted to point out one other thing before I show. Like I said, the next two clips are representatives of the Trump administration trying to justify what's going on with this interference with criminal investigations with the White House political wing and the Justice Department. I don't know how many of you watch All In with Chris Hayes on MSNBC. I didn't have time to put a link in the video description to his intro to his Friday show, where he talked for quite a while about the history of the Department of Justice and the FBI, and as a background to understand why it is, if you read your U.S. Constitution, here's my U.S. Constitution, I always have my pocket Constitution handy, you'll find out that it doesn't mention the Department of Justice. It didn't exist until after the Civil War, and the FBI didn't exist until the early 20th century, and there weren't very many federal crimes at the time of the founding of the United States. So they didn't really think about the criminal power of the president, of the executive, having to be separated from politics in the way that we started doing in the after the abuses of J. Edgar Hoover, who was the FBI director for 50 years, and then, of course, after Watergate, which was like the first post-Hoover administration to be able to try to use the FBI politically, and then we've created all these norms that are supposed to keep the Justice Department, especially criminal investigations, separate from politics, and that's the subject of these next two clips. But one thing that Kellyanne Conway says at the beginning of this clip that I've seen sort of mirrored in some Twitter fights I've gone into in this last week has to do with, you'll see Kellyanne Conway talking about Roger Stone versus Andrew McCabe and how one was prosecuted and the other wasn't. And this is evidence of a two-tiered criminal justice system. And that is like the most galling thing I have ever... that is the thing that upsets me most in some ways about this whole Justice Department scandal that came about this week. That there are people on the right who are saying because Roger Stone was prosecuted and McCabe wasn't, or Comey wasn't, or Brennan and Clapper. That was... I got in this argument with a whole bunch of people who follow Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy, on Twitter. At a link down in the video description, you can see my Twitter account. It's, twitter.com/LiberalViewer, not hard to find. And if you look at the tweets and replies, you'll see all the arguments that I got into with Scott Adams followers about whether the justice system was fair. And I actually think Clapper at least deserved to be prosecuted for lying to Congress. I talked about that years ago in my Sunday Live clip roundup. He's the guy who rubbed his head and told Ron Wyden, the senator from Oregon, that he wasn't creating, dossiers on millions, not wittingly creating dossiers on millions of Americans, even though there was all this spying on millions of Americans that came out in the Snowden revelations. So I'm not justifying any of that. I'm just saying that if you want to look at a two-tier criminal justice system, read this book here, The New Jim Crow, over my left shoulder. And then there's this other book that I also talked about. It's not on my bookshelf anymore, but it's Matt Taibbi's The Divide, which is even more about how rich people have a different type of justice than poor people in the United States. And I even made a video about it that I put a link down in the video description to. It's called Cops, Justice System, Racist, Classist, or Both. Actually, it's more than a year ago at this point, but you can see it's almost 19 minutes long. I put a link down in the video description if you want to. It's almost like a book review of The New Jim Crow and Matt Taibbi's The Divide, and it talks about the racism and classism in the criminal justice system. And that's the two tiers in the criminal justice system, not the two-tiered criminal justice system that Kellyanne Conway talks about. And that's just what's wrong with the beginning of her answer about, how is Trump reacting to Andrew McCabe not being prosecuted. And remember, James Comey and Andrew McCabe were the number one and number two at the FBI. And what does that mean? They're cops. And so cops do not get prosecuted in our criminal justice system. And that doesn't mean that there's a bias for liberals to say that cops don't get prosecuted. But Roger Stone was not a cop. He got prosecuted basically because he was blatant about obstructing and attacking the investigation that he was under from the Mueller team. And he lied about his role in Russia collusion. That you'll see in part of this answer, Kellyanne Conway claims there was no Russian collusion, but Roger Stone lied about being the go-between between the Trump administration, or the Trump campaign, and WikiLeaks, which was distributing material that Russians had hacked from the DNC. Now, that's not a crime because the publisher is not liable for the crime of hacking if they publish material that they weren't involved in hacking. That's under the First Amendment, and I've spent a lot of time already discussing many issues, but I will talk about all of it a little more after we watch this. I'm sorry, I know some people don't like to watch Kellyanne Conway. This is almost 6 minutes talking about trying to justify Trump versus the Justice Department, and I will talk about all of it a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
What does the president think of the decision to drop the criminal investigation of former FBI official Andrew McCabe? Does he think that McCabe should be prosecuted?
Well, the president recognizes, as many people do, there feels like there's a two-tiered criminal justice system. If you're President Trump or people associated with him, those prosecutions have gone one way. If you're someone like Andy McCabe, who wasn't just a garden variety FBI agent just starting out, he was the number two and for a while the acting director of the whole FBI after Comey was fired. No one, including Andy McCabe, his FBI counsel Lisa Page, familiar name, has denied that he lied. And he didn't lie once, he lied multiple times. What did he lie about? Well, on about the end of October 2016, he authorized a leak to Devin Bartlett, then a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. And the leak was about the ongoing investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. So he authorizes the leak, and then he lies about even knowing about the leak. Then he is able to correct that on tape in an on-the-record, under oath interview in July 20, well, this is important, July 2017, and lies again. And so this is somebody, he will still be a serial liar, whether he's prosecutor or not.
Well, here, let's get to the bottom line. Does the president think the McCabe case should be reopened and he should be prosecuted?
The president appreciates the fact that this Department of Justice and Attorney General Barr works on any number of issues with this White House that doesn't get any kind of coverage. Sanctuary cities, Texas versus Azar.
Please answer my question.
Trafficking of drugs, humans, and guns, for example. Any number of issues we work on with the Department of Justice. This is small potatoes, but people see it for what it is.
The McCabe case is small potatoes?
He's small potatoes. He will always be seen as a serial liar and a leaker, as are those who covered for him. And what we're most concerned about is making sure that the 35,000 rank-and-file FBI men and women who bravely do their job every day with integrity and fidelity and bravery aren't being put in that same big toxic stew with those, including Andy McCabe, who were at the top levels of the FBI in 2016, trying to prevent Donald Trump from being president.
Does the president think the McCabe case should be reopened?
The president thinks that Andy McCabe should have been punished because he lied, and he lied several times to the investigators, and many people feel the same way.
Okay.
I'm not going to spend a lot more of my life on Andy McCabe.
Okay, and I'm not going to spend any more of this interview on that. Attorney General Barr said this week the president has never asked him to do anything in a criminal case. But Mr. Trump tweeted, "This doesn't mean that I do not have as president the legal right to do so. I do, but I have so far chosen not to." What does the president think is his legal authority to intervene in criminal cases and to order who should be prosecuted and who should not be prosecuted?
He didn't say he's ordering who should be prosecuted, who should not be prosecuted.
I didn't say he did. I'm saying, what does he think is his authority?
Article 2 provides our president, yes, ladies and gentlemen, including President Trump, vast powers. And the president is making the point, and the Attorney General, Bill Barr, is backing him up on this, that he has not interfered in any criminal case. I know people who are trying to bully Bill Barr out of his job, like Elizabeth Warren. Her campaign is dwindling. She's practically disappearing as a viable candidate, so she's got to pick on Bill Barr. He's not going to be bullied by people like Elizabeth Warren, Steve Cohen, the congressman who put a bucket of chicken there and then couldn't show up to the State of the Union.
To get involved in criminal cases?
Well, the president has vast authority. The president could weigh in, but you see how the president weighs in. The president weighs into the whole world. He didn't have a conversation with Bill Barr about the Roger Stone case. He had a conversation with the whole world. He put it, as he is wont to do, on his Twitter feed, on social media. And he expresses himself, cuts out the middleman. I know the middlemen don't like that. In the democratization of information, where he tells everybody what he thinks on any number of issues, including the Stone case.
Bill Barr, wait a minute. Bill Barr says that kind of conversation, even if it's to the whole world, not getting on the phone with Bill Barr, undercuts his authority and makes it impossible for him, Bill Barr, to do his job. Listen to what Barr said in that interview with ABC. Here he is.
If he were to say, go investigate somebody because and you sense it's because they're a political opponent, then an attorney general wouldn't carry that out.
Since Watergate, presidents have generally, perhaps not always, but generally stayed away from involvement in criminal investigations. Will Mr. Trump, going forward, respect Barr's request for him to stop commenting on current cases, whether it's in terms of on the air, public statements or tweets?
Well, a couple things. Very different to pick up the phone and ask your attorney general to do something in a criminal case. The president hasn't done that. He said he hasn't done it. Bill Barr said he hasn't done it. He hasn't done it.
But Barr said
that's incredibly important.
Are making it impossible to do this.
And let me say something. It's not correct to say that presidents have not interfered. Bill Clinton pardoned a relative. He pardoned somebody who refused to testify against him.
Pardoning is
that's involving yourself in criminal
it's
matters.
Different. It's after the criminal process has been completed, and clearly
President Obama spoke up in the Freddie Gray case in Baltimore. President Herbert Walker Bush, Bush 41, I think, commented on the case in LA, probably the Rodney King case. So it's disingenuous to say that presidents don't comment on criminal matters. What is most important here, two things. One is the President of the United States has not asked or directed his Attorney General privately to do anything in any criminal matter, including Roger Stone. Number two, he works hand in glove with the Attorney General, as we all are privileged to do, on any number of matters that affect this country.
Policy is different than criminal cases.
And, Chris Wallace is right there at the end. Policy is different than criminal cases, but that is not the only follow-up question he might have asked there. One thing I noticed in that last 30 seconds, Kellyanne Conway slipped in the word privately. Like, Trump has never asked his attorney general to intervene in any way in any criminal cases privately, and because he's done it publicly. We've seen the tweets. We've seen him do it, and so should we believe he hasn't done it privately? I don't know why we would believe that, but even if we did believe that, does that mean it's okay if he does it in public? Like, I mean, it reminds me of who will rid me of this troublesome priest? That's not soliciting a murder. If wasn't that Henry VIII who said, "Who will rid me of," was it Thomas More? Someone tell me down in the comment section if I'm remembering but isn't that "Who will rid me of this troublesome priest"? Isn't that the asking someone to kill Henry VIII asking someone to kill Thomas More, but not really asking. But it's like Michael Cohen said, you know, Trump doesn't ask you or tell you what he wants, but he speaks in a code like, this is the greatest tie. That's actually what Michael Cohen used as his example. This is the greatest tie in the world, and he doesn't tell you to say that, but he says it to you, and you know he wants you to say it. And I mean, it's just ridiculous, that particular defense of Donald Trump, that as far as you know, privately he hasn't asked Bill Barr to do anything, even though publicly he's done it right in front of you. And but pay no attention to your lying eyes. Just listen to what Bill Barr and Trump are performing for you on, you know, in their, is it some sort of weird kabuki theater? And are they, I don't know. You can let me know what you think about all that. And then one more thing that Chris Wallace didn't follow up on. Well, two more things I want to say about that. First, you heard Kellyanne Conway Kellyanne Conway, who sometimes I want to call her Kellyanne Fitzpatrick, and you may wonder, why do I show the Bill Maher clips? Why do I show the Kellyanne Conway clips? Well, I've actually been watching Kellyanne Conway and Bill Maher since Bill Maher was on ABC doing the show Politically Incorrect, and one of his guests was Kellyanne Fitzpatrick before she married George Conway, now like the conservative Republican lawyer who tweets all the time against her boss, Donald Trump. But so I have a long history with Kellyanne Conway, formerly Kellyanne Fitzpatrick, and Bill Maher, even though both of them are, I mean, Bill Maher isn't as right-wing as Kellyanne Conway, but I saw people talking about Bill Maher's move to the right in the comment section earlier. And as I've said, sometimes he hasn't done the full Dennis Miller yet, and so I'm still willing to use his clips. And one other thing I wanted to talk about, two other things. McCabe, Kellyanne Conway was talking about Andrew McCabe leaking, and the leaking he did was actually beneficial to Donald Trump. She said it was about Hillary Clinton's emails. I think it was actually saying that there was an investigation into the Clinton Foundation. So the thing that Donald Trump's so mad about Andrew McCabe leaking about, and then being less than candid, not necessarily lying, but less than candid during the investigation about whether he leaked, it was all stuff that benefited Donald Trump, kind of like James Comey and his big press conference that helped Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in October 2016. So that was one of the problems with what Kellyanne Conway said in that last clip. And then the last thing that Chris Wallace failed to follow up on was you heard Kellyanne Conway talk about previous examples of presidents who have commented on pending criminal investigations. She talked about Obama mentioning, talking about the Freddie Gray incident in Baltimore, and George H.W. Bush talking about the beating of Rodney King. And something Donna Brazile in the panel discussion later on Fox News Sunday pointed out is both of those examples were presidents trying to calm unrest, like where the communities were going to riot. And well, Rodney King, they did riot, and there were some Freddie Gray riots too. So those were both examples of presidents trying to calm a situation of civil unrest, which I don't recall any civil unrest on behalf of Roger Stone and his conviction. So if anyone knows of like pro Roger Stone community activist protests that I didn't see, you can let me know about it down in the comment section. But anyway, that's the criticisms I wanted to make of Kellyanne Conway and Chris Wallace in that Fox News Sunday interview. The one other sort of representative of the Trump administration who went out on the Sunday morning news analysis shows was the chief of staff for the vice president, Mike Pence, Marc Short, who used to be the legislative director for the Trump administration. And Dan Abash spent about 5 minutes cross-examining him on the same issues you just saw Kellyanne Conway talk about. And this is I have Amy Klobuchar talking about the Trump versus Justice issue as the final clip on this topic before I get to the Democratic candidates talking about their contest to try to replace Donald Trump. But anyway, here is 5 minutes from CNN's State of the Union. Dana Bash versus Marc Short on a lot of these same issues, starting off with a clip of Bill Barr on talking to Pierre Thomas on ABC. I don't know why you didn't see more of this on ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos, but anyway, I will talk about all of that with you a little more after we watch this 5-minute attempt at defending Donald Trump from his vice president's chief of staff, Marc Short, over in this clip.
State of the Union, I'm Dana Bash. The latest critic of President Trump's Twitter feed is his own Attorney General, Bill Barr, who said this week that the president's tweets about current Justice Department cases make it impossible for Barr to do his job. Clearly undeterred, though, President Trump is still tweeting about current cases. And some new moves by the Justice Department are raising questions about political interference. Joining me now is the Chief of Staff for the Vice President and President Trump's former Legislative Affairs Director, Marc Short. Thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Thanks for having me on, Dan.
So let's start with what the Attorney General said this week. Let's take a listen.
To have public statements and tweets made about the department, about our people in the department, our men and women here, about cases pending in the department, and about judges before whom we have cases, make it impossible for me to do my job.
Why did the Attorney General feel the need to do this?
I don't know, Dana. I don't think that it's impossible to do his job. In fact, I think that Attorney General Barr is doing a great job. I think he has a lot of confidence inside the White House. I think that the president's frustration is one that a lot of Americans have, which feels like the scales of justice are not balanced anymore. That when someone like Roger Stone gets a prosecution that suggests a 9-year jail sentence, which is 4 years above the sentencing guidelines, and candidly, someone like Andy McCabe, who also lied to federal investigators, gets a lucrative contract here at CNN, people say, how is this fair? And how is it equitable? And I think that's the president's frustration.
You don't think that it's unusual for the Attorney General to come out in any administration, but particularly in this administration, to basically say to the president, back off?
Oh, well, I'm not going to tell you it's not unusual, but I think that he does enjoy the support of the president. And I think that, again, the concern that we have is the sense that the scales of justice are not the same. Again, what we've seen again and again is that the Department of Justice has been politicized, and Attorney General Barr is trying to correct that. Normally what would happen in a case like Roger Stone's is if somebody's asked for a sentence that is 4 years above the sentencing guidelines, it goes up the chain to say, here's why I'm suggesting that. Once that happened, Barr took it back and said, no, that's to be excessive. But I think there's concern about a lot of people who knew that the Mueller probe was a fraudulent probe.
Which is understandable. There's understandable concern on any level in any case. But it's a totally different thing when it's the President of the United States involving himself in criminal cases, particularly involving people who are close to him. And since that interview, and that's basically not me speaking, that's obviously what the Attorney General was getting at, the President continued to tweet. He tweeted about the Justice Department's decision not to prosecute Andy McCabe and asserted his right to intervene in criminal cases. So why isn't the president listening to his Attorney General?
The president has been able to communicate directly with the American people through a social media outlet. It is something that helped propel him to the presidency. It's one of the things that the American people love about him is they can communicate directly with him. He's going to keep doing it. It's what he's done from the beginning, and I think it's a very effective way for him to communicate with the American people. When we talk about weighing in, I've read even today in the Washington Post, I had an editorial talking about Bill Barr being the president's wingman. Those are the exact words Eric Holder used when he said, I am Obama's wingman. And the media never criticized that. Yet today, it's never been an accusation that Barr says I'm his wingman, but the media is criticizing and alleging it.
Well, I think it's not, first of all, it's not the media, it's Barr now. Barr is the one who's criticizing the president for his tweets, not us.
No, what the media is criticizing is they're alleging that Barr is the president's wingman doing basically politicizing the DOJ, when in fact Eric Holder said, I am Obama's wingman. And the media was silent at that time, Dana. The reality is that Barr is being independent. He did come into this decision on his own. It was not something he was influenced by the president.
But what I hear you saying is that it's okay, because the president uses social media in an effective way, that it's okay to take that to a level that he is a disruptor, he is a precedent breaker, but this takes it to a level where the Justice Department has historically lived up to its name. Mark, you know that. It's an advocate for independent justice. It's seen that way around the world.
What's been happening inside the Justice Department has been unprecedented. When you basically knew the Russia collusion was a hoax and you continued to pursue it, you continued to try to entrap people, that is something that the American people have not seen before, and it is a danger too. So for the president to speak up and say it's unfair to prosecute and suggest 4 years extra years in prison for Roger Stone.
But isn't there another way to communicate?
The number 2 person in DOJ go free and this again have a lucrative contract here at CNN doesn't really seem for most people to be an equitable system, Dana.
But most people is one thing. Again, for the president of the United States to inject himself and
and Dana Bash kind of pushed back against the no Russia collusion thing, and that's bogus. As I mentioned earlier, Roger Stone was actually convicted of lying about his role in Russia collusion. He lied about the fact that he was the go-between between the Trump administration and and WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks was releasing the emails that Russia hacked from the DNC. As I was talking about earlier, that's not a crime because under the First Amendment, the publisher of illegally obtained materials is not liable for the illegality unless they conspired with the illegal conspiracy to hack or however steal that material. Although one of the ironies of all this is the Trump administration has actually indicted the head of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, for being the publisher of the material that was hacked from the Defense Department by for some reason, the only name I remember, the then named Bradley Manning, who that whole thing where WikiLeaks was only the publisher, yet Julian Assange is still being charged with conspiracy just for helping Manning come up with a way of not being detected hacking the materials, which is something journalists do all the time, help protect their sources. And anyway, I'm going off on a big tangent here, but the First Amendment protects WikiLeaks from being charged with being part of the Russian hacking conspiracy if all they did was distribute the materials. But Roger Stone was and that's why Roger Stone wasn't charged with conspiracy, as part of Russia collusion, but it's still Russia collusion when Roger Stone served as the go-between between the Trump campaign and WikiLeaks on the release of the material that Russia hacked from the DNC. That was the point I was trying to make in that long roundabout way. And Marc Short, I don't know, compared to, how do you compare Dana Bash's cross-examination of Marc Short versus Chris Wallace's cross-examination of Kellyanne Conway? It's, it's a lot of the same bullshit, but is it parsed differently by the representatives of the Trump administration and cross-examined differently by CNN and Fox News? You can let me know what you think about the juxtaposition of those two clips. And before I leave the topic of Trump versus the Justice Department, I want to show you a clip of Amy Klobuchar, who I'm going to criticize in the clip after next for being a prosecutor. That's something I also criticized Kamala Harris for, who dropped out of the race because she was a prosecutor here in San Francisco and then the Attorney General of California. And I don't think she really fought against what what you can read about in The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, the problem of mass incarceration. I'm not saying no prosecutor can ever claim to be progressive, but if they're going to be progressive, they have to show how they fought against mass incarceration. And I'm going to talk about that more before I show the clip after next. But one thing a prosecutor might be good for is explaining why prosecutors have to be non-political, and that's actually something. Prosecutors are almost always political anyway, and that's one thing I kind of have to agree with the defenses you saw from Kellyanne Conway and Marc Short, that, oh, well, it's not like prosecutions have never been politicized, because there is always a political aspect, and Amy Klobuchar could have talked about the importance of not politicizing prosecutions as a former prosecutor, but she didn't. Not in this clip, not in any of the interviews she did this week. And in fact, one of the things I wanted to mention was after the New Hampshire primary, there were all these speeches. Amy Klobuchar gave her speech, introducing herself. That was one after this whole Roger Stone manipulation interference story had broken. Amy Klobuchar didn't mention it in her speech. Bernie Sanders didn't. Pete Buttigieg didn't. Nobody did except for Elizabeth Warren, and so I have to give her credit for that. And I'll talk more about how I wish Elizabeth Warren was doing better when I get to the Democratic candidate contest in the next few clips. But this is the final clip on the Trump versus Justice Department topic. Still, it's Amy Klobuchar, and she's talking about, Bill Barr coming and testifying, but doesn't really use her experience as a prosecutor in the way I wish she had, as I will talk about after we watch that clip together. Oh, but she does do something. This clip, this is why I was talking about how if you want to be a progressive prosecutor in the age of mass incarceration, you have to show how you fought mass incarceration. She doesn't do that in this clip, and she makes this argument. I hate to violate Godwin's law or whatever and bring up Nazis, but the argument she makes in response to Dan Abash's follow-up question here, it's like she's saying, I was in charge of the Hennepin County concentration camp under the Nazis, and there was structural anti-Semitism in our concentration camp. And I was in charge of that concentration camp, and so that experience should make me the person who fights institutional anti-Semitism in the Third Reich, or I don't know, there is no Hennepin County in the Third Reich, but that's basically what she's saying here, is like, I was in charge of him in concentration camps, so that makes me that gives me good experience to fight institutional anti-Semitism, is what she's saying about her experience with mass incarceration. If I haven't gone too far, you can let me know after we watch this clip together over here.
Great to be on, Margaret. Thanks. Do you take Attorney General?
Wait, hold on. Is that the... Hold on. Let me make sure I'm getting the right clip here. Sorry, this is the clip over here.
Great to be on, Margaret. Thanks. Do you take Attorney General Barr at his word that he would...
Oh, I'm... Sorry, the clip after next is the one with the Nazi concentration camp metaphor I want to talk about. This is just Amy Klobuchar not talking about her experience as a prosecutor when she's talking about the Bill Barr politicization of the Justice Department. And I'll get to the Nazi concentration camp example in the next clip. But anyway... Here she is on CBS News' Face the Nation talking about the Trump versus Justice Department problem over here.
Great to be on, Margaret. Thanks. Do you take Attorney General Barr at his word that he would not take legal measures for political purposes and that his personal intervention in the Roger Stone case had nothing to do with the president's directive?
You know, I think he needs to go under oath, and I'm very glad that he's going to have to testify before the House Judiciary Committee. I also hope he comes over to our Senate Judiciary Committee as well, because that's where we're really going to be able to get that answer. The president is constantly tweeting out different requests of the Justice Department, and I think here, where you've got career prosecutors that made difficult decisions about how to handle this case. They got a conviction, they put their all into it, and then they get undermined on the sentencing. And one of them leaves the Justice Department, the other ones get transferred off the case. That is not normal at all. You have to allow justice to have its course, and that means no political intervention.
All right. We'll see if that hearing happens, Senator. But I want to get to your candidacy now. You are a 2020 contender. You did.
Sorry, I mixed up the clips. But yeah, like I said, that was the last clip in the Trump versus Justice topic where Amy Klobuchar, she talked about wanting Bill Barr to testify and not believing Bill Barr and some of the problems with what he's been doing, but didn't really use her experience as a prosecutor. But this next clip is the first. First I have Amy Klobuchar, then Tom Steyer, then Pete Buttigieg, then Joe Biden on my Democratic candidate for president update, who can beat Trump. And this is Amy Klobuchar responding to, people talk about her having Klobumentum, and they're making all these like I refer to her, Kamala Harris. I showed a clip of her on the Sunday shows several months back where she was asking, you were a cop, you're a cop, right? You can't lie to me and say you're not a cop if you were a cop, right? And she was a cop. And so I kind of refer to Amy Klobuchar sometimes as Klobocop. I don't know. If she ends up being the nominee, I will vote for her, and I'll justify it by saying, well, when you have a criminal president, maybe you need a cop as a challenger or a prosecutor as a challenger. But like I sort of pre-introduced before I showed that last clip, this is the clip where in the follow-up, Dana Bash says, don't you take, there are all the number of juveniles who were black when you were prosecuting were way out of proportion to their percentage of the population. Don't you take any responsibility for that being so racist? And she says, well, everybody's responsible for racism, and there was institutional racism, but my experience as a big commander in this institutionally racist system gives me the experience necessary to fight it. And this is my fight, as the commandant of the Hennepin County concentration camp, I have the experience to fight institutional anti-Semitism. That's in this next clip, which I'm sorry I messed up before the last clip, which one I was showing. But this is Amy Klobuchar talking to Dana Bash, and I found this particularly galling, as I will discuss with you after we watch this first of 4 candidate clips of the Democratic candidates, Klobuchar, Steyer, Buttigieg, and Biden, to finish up the show over here.
The sentencing. That's just not normal.
Okay, so Senator, let's talk about where you are now, the primary, and the calendar is about to get, and the states where you are about to get much more diverse. You finished very strong in New Hampshire, as you well know, and because of all of that, your time as a prosecutor in Minnesota's Hennepin County is getting more scrutiny. So I want to ask you about that. I want you to listen to what you said when you were running for prosecutor in 1998.
I think I'm going to look young.
When you look at the crime rate in Hennepin County, it's not acceptable. We have to look at making sure that there's a consequence when someone commits a crime. When you see the dramatic reductions in crime in other parts of the country, we can learn a lot from what they're doing, and they're enforcing the law down the line.
So that tough-on-crime approach has now been linked to racial disparities in the criminal justice system. So in retrospect, do you regret that?
Well, let's set this up. I was running against a Republican opponent who actually was advocating for longer sentences as well as less gun control. So I was actually arguing, when I talk about consequences, it can mean things like drug courts, like restorative justice, which was a major focus of my time in the county attorney's office. And during my time there, we actually saw a 12% reduction in African-American incarceration rates. So what do I think when I look back at that? I was not involved in some of the controversial issues in other states like stop and frisk. I understand that is unconstitutional. But what I was focused on there is trying to go after crimes and making sure there's a consequence. But it does not mean that it always has to be prison time. There just has to be some kind of reaction to make sure that people aren't just committing crimes and there's no response. The response has to be tailored to what the crime is.
Okay, so from 2002 to 2004, more than 60% of juveniles brought to the Hennepin County Juvenile Detention Center were black, according to a Council on Crime and Justice study, even though only around 10% of the county's overall population was black. You've been clear that you believe that there is racism in the justice system, but given that and given the stats from back then, do you take any responsibility for the racial disparities in the criminal justice system on your watch?
I think everyone involved in the criminal justice system has to take responsibility, including myself. What we know is that there's institutional racism, and how do we get at it is really my job and will be my job as president. And I would argue someone with this experience actually could do a very good job of getting at it. One, sentencing changes like the First Step Act that I was a co-sponsor of that we passed. And as a prosecutor, it was important to have me as one of the co-sponsors, reducing nonviolent sentences on the federal level. As president, I will roll it out for the Second Step Act to create incentives for the states where 90% of people are incarcerated. Doing something for clemency and having a clemency board outside of the Justice Department, an innovative approach that I'll bring forward as president. Doing more when it comes to eyewitness identifications, diversifying police departments and offices, making sure that we have videotape interrogation, something that I advocated for when I was prosecutor. I've always said that we are not like a business in the criminal justice system. You don't want to see repeat customers. What you want to see is people get help so they can get out of the system, which is why I've been the lead Democrat when it comes to drug courts.
Senator, I want to turn now to one of your opponents for the Democratic nomination.
And they talk about Michael Bloomberg there, and I did see some live comments along the way about whether I'm going to talk about all the things, the problems with Michael Bloomberg, and I'll talk about that in a second. But, well, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip, and I even pre-criticized it before I showed the clip before, talking about my whole concentration camp analogy. I'm seeing some, like, I might have a Dash and Sandy clip. You can kind of hear him here. Here, I'm gonna. There, I've gotten, like, right now. I just took the Dash and Sandy clip that I will show you at the end of the program, because there was a little bit of Dash and Sandy interaction there while I was talking. I don't know if you could hear it in the background. But anyway, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip, but with the whole concentration camp analogy. And did you see that 1998 clip of Amy Klobuchar? She did look pretty young, like she said she was going to. And I thought that was one of the best interviews with Amy Klobuchar was the Dana Bash one, even though she was on multiple shows. And anyway, I have 3 more clips, and like I said, I cut that off before they talked about Bloomberg. This next clip is actually Tom Steyer, and his big problem is you can kind of see Martha Raddatz. This is from ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz is interviewing Tom Steyer, and she asks him kind of the question that she doesn't phrase it this way, but it's like, haven't you been out-billionaired by Michael Bloomberg? And Tom Steyer tries to differentiate himself from the bigger, stronger billionaire who's sort of usurped his place in the Democratic contest. And I will talk about that with you after we watch that clip together over here.
You can do a better job. How do you convince them that you can do a better job than the other billionaire, Michael Bloomberg?
Well, I have a very specific set of proposals here, Martha. One is I am promising and can easily deliver a 10% tax cut to everybody in America who makes less than $250,000. 2, I'm saying I'm going to declare a state of emergency on climate on the first day, and that actually rebuilding this country will produce over 4.5 million good-paying union jobs every year for as far as the eye can see.
And Mr. Steyer, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. And third of all, we're talking about a wage structure here that has actually gone down over the last 40 years, and that raising the minimum wage and getting living wages for working Americans is something that's absolutely critical, and we need to stand up for unions, and we need to stand up for the right of working people to bargain collectively, to come together, and to basically fight back against a war on the working people of this country that started with Ronald Reagan and has continued right through to Mr. Trump.
Mr. Steyer, we're just running out of time here. Mr. Steyer, we're running out of time here, and I want you to address the criticism about the amount of money you've spent on the campaign. Elizabeth Warren has called it wrong, and it is not the way a democracy should work.
Well, Martha, if you know my history, you know that what I've done in every single instance, including starting need to impeach, but including going after the climate crisis and fighting corporations successfully for a decade, when I've seen a huge problem in the United States, I've put in all my heart and soul and money to try and solve it. I see a huge problem here. I got into the race late because I was worried that no one was going to take on Mr. Trump the way he needed to be beaten. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. I am putting my heart and soul and money behind the idea that we need to take back this country from the corporations that have bought it, that we need to deal directly with our climate crisis, and we need to deliver social and racial justice across the board. That's what I'm fighting for. I'm giving it everything I have, and that's what I've always done.
Okay, Tom Steyer, thank you for joining us this morning.
So, I don't know. I haven't been that impressed with Tom Steyer. I mean, I like what he's doing. I like the way he spent his money that he was talking about. And I have like whining. Okay, Sandy is calming down and lying down. I did get that Dash and Sandy clip, the dandy clip as some people like to call it. And I do have Dash and Sandy sort of distracting me to my left here. I don't know why, but they're both right there. And I have a clip of them right there. And you'll actually, I took it while I was talking to you before the last clip, and you'll hear me talking. I've heard some conspiracy theories that the Dash and Sandy clips don't really come from the time. They're all like pre-recorded from long ago, but no, you'll actually hear me saying the things I said when I was recording. It's almost like me holding up a newspaper from today to prove it was a live Dash and Sandy clip, but Tom Steyer, like I said, hasn't really impressed me, and I will have more to say. I'm hoping Michael Bloomberg, some people say, has bought his way into the debate this Wednesday, but in some ways, and I've heard several of the candidates say this, it's better that he is in the debate. I wish some other people were still in the debates who haven't been able to make it to this debate, but I'd rather that he actually had to have his time in the barrel, as Roger Stone said at one point about John Podesta. That was one of the pieces of evidence of his collusion with the Russians. But time in the barrel or time in the spotlight, or I think it's better for him to debate than not to debate. And so hopefully by next week after the debate and Nevada, I'll have more to say about Michael Bloomberg. And then Tom Steyer was interviewed there by ABC because his one spot where he might do well is South Carolina, but that's the Saturday after next on February 29th, so maybe he'll resurface at that point. But I want to show you these last two clips about Nevada, not South Carolina. Nevada is next Saturday before my next Sunday live clip roundup. And as you saw in some of the news summaries, especially the Meet the Press news summary, there's been this controversy about the Bernie Bros online going after the Culinary Union in Nevada and because they wouldn't endorse Bernie because they want better health care than they're going to get from Medicare for All. And you'll see the last two clips here are Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden talking about that controversy. I think Pete Buttigieg actually does a good job pivoting to the healthcare issue and not just talking about the Bernie bros, but I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that penultimate news clip together over here.
The candidate with the most Democratic delegates, Pete Buttigieg. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Mr. Maher, I want to start with the Culinary Union in Nevada. The Culinary Union is coming out against Bernie Sanders' health care plan because it would do away with the deal that they negotiated with private insurers. That led to some Sanders supporters personally attacking the union leaders. Sanders has disavowed the attacks. I want to show you what he said. He said that harassment of all forms is unacceptable to me, and we urge supporters of all campaigns not to engage in bullying or ugly personal attacks. You've been critical of Sanders about all of this. Is that good enough for you?
You know, it's really disturbing to see the Culinary Union attacked when these are workers who have stood up and fought for among other things, good health care plans. They're not interested in Washington taking away their choice. And I think part of what's at stake in this election is the idea I'm putting forward of delivering health care to everybody, so there's no such thing as an uninsured American, but doing it with Medicare for all who want it, while union members and others who have good plans are able to keep it. No one should go after working people for wanting to defend and grow what they have earned. And it's a key point of difference at the policy level between me and Senator Sanders. And also, I think very important that supporters of any candidate do this with respect. We have a crisis of respect and decency, obviously, in the White House right now.
Has Senator Sanders done enough to disavow?
There's going to be the heat of competition on our side, but I'll leave it to Senator Sanders to characterize what's going on with his own supporters. What I'll tell you is that I'm focused on making sure that my own supporters and our campaign conduct this competition, even when it's heated, with a level of respect for where people are coming from, because we're talking about workers standing up for their own care.
So, like I said, I thought that was a good pivot by Buttigieg. He didn't really try to claim that Sanders was responsible for anyone online who claimed to be a Sanders supporter. And I think it's kind of ridiculous to try to blame Sanders for anyone who claims to be a Sanders supporter when you don't know who that person is, or even if they're, could be like a Russian bot, or it could be someone trying to make Sanders look bad, or it could be a real Bernie bro who just doesn't like any of the other candidates. And I mean, who knows who it is? And Buttigieg didn't really engage in that kind of conspiracy theory, but Biden, I think, goes a little harder against Bernie in the final news clip I want to show you, which I will talk about with you after we watch that clip together over here.
Good shape. Bernie Sanders is a guy who says he's going to support whoever's the nominee, and he's all in. Are you confident his supporters will do that, or are you worried that some of his supporters, and do you think if his supporters are attacking Culinary Union members, who's responsible for that?
Well, look, he may not be responsible for it, but he has some accountability. I'm going to not put you in a spot you don't have to. You know me well enough to know if any of my supporters did that, I'd disown them. Flat disown them. The stuff that was said online, the way they threatened these two women who are leaders in that Culinary Union, it is outrageous. Just go online. I invite anybody to go and take a look. The things they said, the vicious, malicious, misogynistic things they said, the threats they put out. And to say I disassociate is one thing. Find out who the hell they are. If any of them work for me, fire them. Find out. See what's going on.
You don't think he's been curious enough?
I'm hoping he's looking. But I tell you what, so far I don't think it's sufficient just to say I disassociate myself.
Mr. Vice President? Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Thank you.
So I don't know. What do you think? Is Bernie Sanders responsible for the people who claim to be Bernie bros and say misogynistic and terrible things about women who work for the Culinary Union in Nevada? I don't know. That seems a little bit far-fetched to blame any random person online or blame Bernie Sanders for the actions of any random person online, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I will have a lot more chance to cover the Democratic candidate contest. Like I said, next Sunday will be the day after Nevada. The Sunday after that will be the day after South Carolina, and then just a few days after that, on March 3rd, will be Super Tuesday, including California. So I will talk about all of these issues a little more, well, a lot more in the next few weeks. But I want to, first of all, thank all of the Super Chat contributors. I showed Lulu Girl talking about my shirt earlier, but I noticed I got several more contributions after that here. Let me show that. So thank you to all of the live viewers who supported my show just by making comments or through those super chat contributions. And I did promise you a Dash and Sandy clip, a dandy clip, as some people like to say, that I recorded as I was talking to you during the program. And I will add it here and show it for the final clip tonight over here. Here, I'm gonna. There, I've gotten, like, right now, I just took. And like I said, you can sync that up and see that I actually recorded it while I was talking during the live stream. It was a live, well, Dash is gone, but Sandy's over there lying down, and I hope you appreciate all the clips I picked out, all the time I put in, the 10 hours I've spent this Sunday and every Sunday for the last 356 Sundays or whatever, picking out clips and giving my commentary and criticism. I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday for the foreseeable future. And until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.